Okay. All right. Well, so we're going to start with like I said, quick overview of the program, some information about the field liaisons and exactly what role we play with the Futures Fund, and then we'll go through some specifics about eligibility and timeline, knowing that the RFP is currently live, and we'll be closing within a couple weeks. So it's right about the time where folks are really getting into the weeds of writing an application and asking lots of questions from the field liaison team and from NFWF to start narrowing down on project ideas. So just to start, I don't know, Rebecca, if you've engaged with the field liaison team before. This is my first year working in Vermont on this program. I was previously leading the Connecticut outreach, but we had some folks up here. We kind of switched around this past cycle. So our role is really to promote the Futures Fund in a couple different ways. It's really meant to help applicants become more competitive as they go to submit for NFWF grants. Recognizing that, NFWF grants, it's a long RFP. There's a lot of management when it comes to the Easy Grants platform. So just helping folks kind of break through all the noise on that and decide, is this project competitive for the RFP? If I got a grant, what would that look like? And, is this competitive in the grand scheme of things, knowing that this is a basin-wide program for the entire Long Island Sound watershed? So that's the role we play, helping to kind of coordinate and think through project competitiveness. We can also help folks troubleshoot if problems come up during the life of a grant. So quick overview of the program. It's been around since 2025, so pretty well established by now. Last year, the federal investment was around $12 million, so that can give you a sense of scale. And really, it is meant to support the health and living resources of Long Island Sound. So all projects in the program have to be able to tie back to the Sound. Obviously, when we're thinking about Vermont and New Hampshire in particular, that means, really making those downstream connections that'll specifically be in the context of nutrient loading and nitrogen. So we'll talk more about what that looks like and how you translate that into applicants. But that's really the main connective tissue here. What happens with water flowing downstream and the nutrients that are in that water. And I see we've got Kelly who just joined us. Hey there, Kelly. Sorry for any tech issues. I think something went wrong here. So glad to have you. We're just going through kind of a quick overview of the slide deck we just started. And then after this, we'll go through like any Q&A and we'll talk about specific project ideas. So you're coming on just at the right time.
Unfortunately, I've only got about 10 minutes. I have a regional partners meeting at 10:30.
Oh, no. Okay.
I'll make sure you get a recording link.
Yeah,
Kelly.
we can send you the recording.
Kelly,
before I move any further, I want to make sure you at least have time to ask questions. Is there anything that you're coming in today? Like I've got to ask this and I've got to make sure I get an answer.
I knew that there, and I think this slide right here might be answering it, but I thought I had read that this was federal funding, but then
yeah, so it's a mix. Most of the money is coming from EPA. Some is coming from Fish and Wildlife Service and Long Island Sound Study as well. But NFWF, because they're a nonprofit, they can pull in from private sources. So it's a kind of an amalgamation of different funding sources, but EPA is going to be the biggest one.
Great. And then I know I was working with Connecticut River Conservancy and still am, like we're going back for round 2 of applications on a project in Woodstock that will be stabilizing a very steep, large bank full of clay. And it just keeps sloughing soil and clay sediment, nitrogen into the Ottaquechee River. And we had a soil sample taken to estimate what the nitrogen reduction would be if this project went through. And it was significant enough to sway our watershed coordinator to be in more support of this very large, daunting project. Is nitrogen reduction still the main goal of that's like the top thing that you guys want to see for LISFF?
Yep. Yeah. So there's a little bit more nuance to it because there are kind of sub-regions that can apply for different things. But all that should matter to you from the Vermont perspective is that the nitrogen and the water quality, that focus is the only thing you can apply for. So
those soil samples and then
Yep.
Okay.
And the fact that you've already sampled and you have those numbers are great.
Great. Okay. We wouldn't need new samples if we're doing a new application this year. The soil hasn't changed.
No, I think that would be fine. John, does that? I see you nodding your head.
Yeah. I don't think there's any need to repeat.
Yeah.
I mean,
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, because it's a very, very gnarly steep bank and I don't want to have to clamber down it. So
fair enough.
again,
That's part of the problem.
super.
Understood.
Thank you. I'll mute
All
and
right.
let you continue.
Awesome. Well, yeah, we'll go through a couple more things, and I think the next few slides should be helpful before you have to hop here. So again, I mentioned different program priorities. So there's 3 different themes for this program. The only one, again, that Vermont in particular, and really the upper basin, is eligible for is this first one, clean waters and healthy watersheds. And that is focused on water quality, specifically with nitrogen and phosphorus as the main pollutants. But these other 2 themes, just for context, are also there. They're meant for regions further down in the basin. So you've got non-coastal Connecticut, and then you have the coastal regions of Connecticut and the North Shore of Long Island. So that's how it all fits together. But collectively, these are the funding priorities that come out of what they call the Long Island Sound Comprehensive Conservation Management Plan, or CCMP. That's the plan for the entire Sound watershed. And then this program is the fund to help implement that plan. So that's how those 2 tie together. So this is maybe a helpful graphic to look at, because we're talking specifically about this yellow area up north. That's what they're calling the upper basin. So it's all of the Connecticut River watershed in Vermont, New Hampshire, and Massachusetts. And then it also extends, down to the Sound itself. So the entire basin can do that clean water and healthy watersheds theme. But then as you get closer to the coast, you kind of unlock these other themes that you can also be eligible for. But we won't cover those too much today, since this is focused on Vermont in particular. So this is the theme, clean waters and healthy watersheds. It's meant to improve water quality, again, by reducing nitrogen pollution, reducing CSOs, that's combined sewer overflows, impervious surface area, and then stormwater and other sources of pollution. It can be done in a number of different ways here, and there is some flexibility. So we've seen, agricultural projects come in. We've seen wastewater treatment plants. We've seen municipalities with green infrastructure. And then we've seen kind of stream bank stabilization and buffers, forested buffers, and riparian buffers. So it's a range of different practices that can actually be put in place here, so long as they can all tie back to nutrient reductions. So you see some of those examples on screen. Some more on the next slide here. We've got replacing or right-sizing culverts. Again, I mentioned some ag practices, so that can be TA, to technical assistance to rural landowners. It can be actually addressing runoff through farm-scale conservation systems. And if we're thinking about the ag sector, it's usually good to kind of bundle multiple farms together, maybe under a conservation district as an applicant. Or it can be specific practices like regenerative ag, soil health best practices, or nutrient management. So a range of different tools here, and there, all of these have been awarded in one way, shape, or form to other grantees in the past. So there are examples of how this work has been carried out across the basin, specifically further north. Okay, so a couple different categories to operate here. Oh, and I do see a question. Are beaver-created wetlands included in that reconnection to wetlands? I think they could be, so long as there's that connection to nutrient reduction. If it was more for like a habitat benefit, Kelly, your main focus then would no longer be on nitrogen. So I would say you may actually be a better fit for the Forested Rivers Fund, which is another NFWF program that John in particular operates. So, it's different priorities there. So it would really be how you're selling it and what you're framing it in terms of the main benefits.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think right now the thinking is like flood resilience in a community.
Yeah.
But
so yeah, we've been hearing a lot about beavers and their importance to systems, and so I think for the Northeast Forests and Rivers Fund, yeah, I mean it's something I think we're looking at more as a way to meet some of these goals. And the attitude towards beavers is starting to shift to more positive than traditionally, where people are worried about them flooding their fields or their. So yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, we haven't seen any projects like that to date, but we also don't call it out specifically, but I think it could be a legitimate.
Maybe Long Island Sound Futures Fund could be sort of a leveraging tool in something like a, and again, I haven't done one of these before myself. So would the Northeast Forests and Rivers Fund be something that is so closely aligned with Long Island Sound Futures Fund that they wouldn't be used to leverage each other?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, so Northeast, well, so let's see. I mean, Long Island Sound
Sorry
Futures
to
Fund
sidetrack.
has more money. But yeah, generally Northeast Forests and Rivers Fund doesn't have the water quality component in the same way because
Okay.
we have different funding. I mean, want to improve water quality, but it's not a specific, you don't have to demonstrate nitrogen reductions or anything like that.
Mhm.
But yeah, since they're both have, you know, quite a bit of federal funding, generally we don't kind of mix
Okay.
and match, I guess. Yeah. It's just a matter of which RFP that you kind of fit best into.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I will review these and the recording afterward. I gotta log off this and log into the other. Thank you
Okay.
Thanks,
guys
Kelly.
so much. Sean, I appreciate you nudging me to just log on for as long as I could. So I will stay in touch, and I will probably be that needy one who needs help. So
Perfect. That's what we're here for.
thank you guys. Have a good
Thanks, Kelly.
day.
Thanks,
All right.
Kelly.
All right.
Okay, so picking up here on the different categories, so there are several kind of activities that you can cover under a grant. We talked about best management practices, but this is not just for implementation. You know, there is funding available for earlier stages of a project pipeline. So that can include community engagement and planning. It can include very preliminary feasibility studies, alternatives analyses, site assessments, and early design. It can be further along for final design and permitting, or it can actually be that implementation. So whatever phase you apply at, there's different funding amounts here that you're eligible for. The earlier design and planning phases range from 50 grand to 500 grand for the request amount. Implementation will range from 50,000 to 1.5 million. And then public participation projects, if you do happen to work further downstream as well, that's anywhere between 50 to 100,000, but that is only for Connecticut and New York. So you'd have to be in that portion. Okay, so some quick grant guidelines here. Projects have to start within 6 months of the actual award and then have to be completed within 24 months after the grant is awarded. So that's the period of performance. All match has to also fall within that period. So, you know, if you say acquired land 2 or 3 years ago and you were hoping to use that as match, because that falls outside of the period of performance, that would not be eligible. So it's got to be within that period, but a lot can happen in that time. And then there is also a little bit more of a buffer for larger implementation projects. They still have to start within 6 months of award, but you get an extra year there to actually get the job done. So this year there's a 50% request amount. This is it's out of date here where it says 2024. That's the same for 25. So there is a 50% match requirement for the request that you're making. So if you're requesting 100 grand, you have to come to the table with at least 50,000 of match. That can be non-federal cash funds. It can be in-kind services, volunteer time, staff time. So it does not all have to be cash, but it does have to be non-federal. And it can be from the applicant themselves or other partner organizations. So a good example is, you know, if a municipality is applying and they've got, you know, their conservation district or their local nature conservancy chapter as a co-applicant or as a project partner, if one of those organizations wants to provide staff time as match. That would be a good way to kind of show buy-in from different partners on a project. And then again, it has to fall within that period of performance. So a rough timeline here, the RFP came out in March. Full proposals are due in a couple of weeks. So we're looking at May 29th by midnight. Over the course of the summer and the fall, proposals will be reviewed, and then awards are expected to be announced sometime between November and December of this year. And this is pretty much what the general timeline looks like. There were, of course, some delays this year with things changing at the federal level, but by and large, it kind of stayed on the same timeline here. And I just want to quickly flag some other large programs at NFWF. We talked briefly about Forest and Rivers Fund. So that's another one, again, that John works specifically on, focus more on forest and river habitat. So the species and the habitat benefits are the main selling point there. So if you had a project that wasn't as strong on water quality, or you just didn't have the data to make that case, but you did have the habitat benefits, Forest and Rivers may be a better fit for that. The America's Ecosystem Restoration Initiative is another one that's supporting locally led projects with fish and wildlife habitat benefits, community resilience benefits, workforce development, habitat corridors. So a lot of different pieces of new, but it's really meant to build off of partnerships. Acres for America is for large land acquisitions, especially when the funding needs to go quickly. So that one's a smaller program, and they only typically award a handful of projects per year. But if there's one that really fits the bill, it could be a great candidate for that, especially if folks need to move quickly on it. 5-Star and Urban Waters is meant to build capacity, especially at the local level. And then the National Coastal Resilience Fund is not, Vermont is not eligible for that. But if you work across state boundaries, that's meant for coastal resilience across the country. So this is just our the field liaison team. This is our project manager who kind of fields all of our questions and disseminates them. But my email is the same naming convention here. It's just kyle@throwe-environmental.com. So Rebecca or anyone else watching this can definitely feel free to reach out with questions on specific projects or on the program in general. So that is the pitch here of the program. Let me take this down. All right. And Rebecca, the floor is still yours. You have, again, you have access to the field liaison, meaning me. You've got access to John, Sean, who's got obviously all of the statewide perspective here. Happy to think through project ideas or answer questions if you've got them.
Yeah, cool. Thanks for that background. I guess one of the questions is, and probably it's on everyone's mind, is how vulnerable is the funding, right? In a given, just given all of it, is that?
Yeah. So without speculating too much, so the program's running. That's a good sign, and I think the program staff are feeling optimistic that this funding is going to come down. But you'll see in the RFP, there is kind of a caveat paragraph at the top, right as you open the document itself, that says, this program is still, it's susceptible to changes at the federal level. So that hasn't gone away. With most of the money coming from EPA, it really will depend on what's happening with EPA and whether or not that funding is made available. I think we're hearing encouraging signs for this program and across NFWF. So I know I feel optimistic that it's running right now. Awards will likely be made. But I think you're right, there is still some level of uncertainty, and there's just no way to predict what that looks like. John, I don't know if you have anything else on that. I know it's, you guys are hearing things day to day.
Yeah, I don't really have anything additional, but yeah, it is just uncertain. I mean, we're moving our programs forward kind of as normal. And as we get updates on funding, we'll adjust as needed. But yeah, it's just impossible to know what actually will happen. So
yeah.
I think good good advice may be, you know, if folks are already thinking through project ideas and they're considering submitting, it's still, I think, a wise idea to do that, because you could get valuable feedback from grant reviewers this year, you know, even if the project doesn't get funded or something happens to the funding, and then take that feedback and the project concept itself and reapply next cycle. So, you know, it is an annual program, so I do still think there's some benefit to getting, you know, guidance and feedback from the folks at NFWF and their reviewers year after year, so that you can kind of come back to the table more informed and in a better position to compete in a following year.
And I actually had a question for you, John, on the other fund in terms of, I heard you say something about flood resilience as well. Is that a motivation? I get that that's not for the Long Island fund.
Right. Yeah, so we're looking at, yeah, we're also interested in kind of community benefits as well as benefits to fish and wildlife.
Yeah.
So yes, that is, yeah, and that can come through, you know, barrier removals or, you know, culvert retrofits, or yeah, reconnecting streams to a floodplain.
Yeah.
So yeah, that is something that we consider as part of the program.
Yeah. And
One piece I'll just add on that for the Futures Fund is, you know, the resilience piece it can't be the main selling point for a project upstream, like you said, Rebecca. But it can certainly be a co-benefit. So if there were activities that you were carrying out, like a culvert replacement or a stream reconnection, that you were able to characterize as primarily benefiting the nutrient reduction, but it also had substantial resilience benefits. And even if in your heart of hearts it's a resilience project, but you're able to characterize it as nitrogen, it could still be very competitive in this program. You know, it's got to fit the bill for what this is allowed to fund.
Yeah.
But those other co-benefits are really important, and those do tend to split, you know, that make the difference when you're actually submitting and when they decide who's going to get funded.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sure, that's helpful.
And if you're not aware, there's also we have what we call a business plan for the Northeast watersheds, which includes, it's a 10-year conservation investment strategy. So it includes both the Long Island Sound Futures Fund and the Northeast Forests and Rivers Fund. And the business plans are all on our website. And it really lays out species and geographies and priorities for the program. So that might be worth a look just to understand more deeply, you know, what we're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, cool. I mean, I kind of wear two hats in these things. One that is more of the implementation side, but more broadly, the work I do is a lot more sort of broad scale planning and prioritization, you know, so it fall into sort of the upper buckets of your schematic. I don't know, is there any sort of thoughts or feedback on that? I know NFWF is very, right, like goal oriented, right? So sort of the metrics drive a lot of this. And it's slightly, except for communities engaged, it's slightly harder to put those metrics in as much when you're doing more of the planning. So I just thought, I was wondering if you had any sort of thoughts on.
Yeah, terrific question. And you're coming from UVM, right, Rebecca? Yeah, so I think from the university academic kind of research perspective too, it can be challenging because not just in this program, but other ones that we work on with NFWF, a lot of universities will submit really solid proposals that are very research based, that aren't as, like you said, goal oriented or implementation oriented. And that can be a challenge, and they can, you know, submit that application and not get funded, even if it's a great concept, because it doesn't tee up implementation as much as, you know, these programs for NFWF typically like to.
Yeah.
So I would say that's something to be mindful of. And one way to navigate that, you know, early on in the planning phase is to think about what those metrics may eventually look like, even if you don't know them now, right? In the planning phase, you could think through, what are we going to need to know when it comes to nitrogen reduced or, the other ecosystem benefits? How can we start to plan for that and gather that data now? And in your application, you would say anything preliminarily. So even if you don't know, the nitrogen quantity in the soil or, the loading downstream, you could put out really rough estimates and say, this is how we plan to get more solid estimates of nutrient loading. These are the best management practices that we're going to look at. But at this phase, we are building capacity. We're working with multiple towns to help conduct watershed planning. And we will look at nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment. We expect to see a range between X and Y. We'll implement, or we'll position the town to eventually implement, A, B, and C best management practices that reduce nitrogen. We chose those because they're a good fit based on, the geography that we're working in, the ecosystem itself and the downstream benefits. So you could walk through the process, even if you don't know all the answers. And that's tended to be one way that I think folks can, still be competitive without having all that information up front. But from the university perspective, I think it's also helpful to have some of those like implementation partners there, on the same proposal. So if a town or a conservation district or a land trust is eventually going to be putting these projects in the ground, having them involved early and working towards the implementation output is typically more fundable for NFWF than working towards like a research model or like a decision-making tool that kind of exists on its own.
Yeah. I mean, we do have some metrics, at least for the Northeast Forests and Rivers Fund, that are about planning more and design. Like, we funded like the White River Partnership has been doing prioritization of culverts and assessing them so that later on, going, some way on the design, but to tee up later, like there's a metric that says the number of barriers assessed and or with design plans. So if that's the kind of thing, that is something that you could use to just indicate what you expect to, how many culverts you might expect to assess in a watershed.
What questions I have for now?
One last thought on that one, something that John just said. I think that White River example is a really good one because the prioritization tool or matrix, whatever White River is using to make those decisions, I think the compelling point there is not that there is a matrix that exists, but that they're applying it to the specific geography and they're actually putting culverts in and getting culverts out. Of the matrix and deciding, here's where we're going to move forward, down the line, and maybe we'll go after more NFWF funding for that. So that's kind of what I meant with the model or the decision-making tool guidance. Is as long as you can apply it and you are doing that during the planning phase of a grant, that tends to be the more compelling piece. So good question.
Yeah.
All right. Well, if there is nothing else for you, Rebecca, Sean, John, any, large kind of big picture things that we want to just mention, anything else that's stuck out from the conversation?
I don't know if at some point I think it would be good, you and I haven't ever gotten together just one-on-one to talk about any overlap that we have in terms of what you're doing, and I feel like if the implementation part or partnerships with watershed groups or conservation districts or any, if I can sort of connect you with that crowd or I don't know, I just feel like it would be good to talk together. And I've got, I went to the meeting that you gave a presentation to last night, and I feel like there's questions I have that I would love to talk to you about. So anyway, it might be good to get together.
Sorry, Sean, were you saying that to me or?
Yes, yes,
Yeah,
yeah,
oh,
right.
I'm so sorry. I thought you were talking to Kyle. I'm so sorry. Oh yeah, that would be. I'm really sorry. I thought you were saying
It's
that to
okay.
Kyle. I was like, okay, I didn't give a talk last night, but maybe Kyle did too.
Yeah, right.
Nope.
Yeah, that would be great, Sean. I would like. Yeah, that would be really cool.
John, any last words of wisdom on your end?
No, unless, I mean, if you're gonna apply for the Forest and Rivers Fund, yeah, there's a little more time. I mean, proposals are due June 26th, so about a month after the Long Island Sound Futures Fund proposals are due. And I just always encourage people to reach out, with ideas. You know, as long as I have, some time or advance, I'm happy to look at kind of draft proposals. If you have a pretty good idea what you're trying to do, and I can, review it and, try to come up with, things I think would make it more competitive for the program that may not be in it yet.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
feel free to reach out.
That's great. I mean, that's the problem. I have ideas. It's right. Just finding like the right thing for the right hole and with the right
Yeah.
concept. So,
Yeah.
it's helpful to make these connections and to hear, the perspective of the program. And so, yeah, thanks for putting this on.
Yeah. Yep. And one last thing that John just said that made me think, you could apply for multiple programs. There's nothing at NFWF that stops you from applying from both.
Right.
So obviously that does require some reworking if, one program benefits nitrogen and the other one's focused on habitat. But knowing the geographies are, pretty much the same, the activities can be relatively the same. It doesn't take too much reworking to go from one to the other, and especially with close deadlines. So whether that means applying for Futures Fund and Forest and Rivers this year, Forest and Rivers this year and Futures Fund next, or some other combination, you could kind of do that intentionally and, increase your odds or at least throw your hat in the ring for both. So just an idea. Awesome. All right. Well, thank you, Rebecca, Sean, and John. Thanks for joining and helping to put this on. I'll send out the recording probably today. I think it'll process pretty quick and we should be good to go.